Welcome to the GreatBase Tennis Podcast. I'm Steve Smith along with Dave Anderson. Dave Anderson is in Dallas, Texas at Invited Flagship. Big complex. Brookhaven Country Club. Welcome, David. Welcome, listeners. Episode
Hello.
309.
Yeah.
We've been asked to go back to basics, and we're going to talk about the serve. The term serve comes from tennis at one time before 1873 with Sir Walter Clapton Wingfield, and the servant was on the side of the court putting the ball in play. But now it's the first shot of every point. Sometimes it's the only shot. I've heard people argue now that the return of serve is the most important shot because everybody can serve. But for the longest time, people would just say the serve's number one. So let's review the serve. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I was looking at some stats the other day, and these aren't really technical aspects of the serve, but some amazing things. With a guy like Zverev and average first serve speed at 128 and managing to get 75, 76% in on a pretty regular basis, and the perceived flat serve versus the actual rotation that some of the world-class players. I know Roddick was very effective at it when he hit what was perceived as his flat serve. And you want to comment on that before we kind of delve into the technique on it, on the realities of the flat serve?
Yeah, so many things on the serve. No, we can do that. Zverev, congratulations. Great to see him win. I mean, he's been so high, so long, so successful. I mean, you're 2-3 in the world. You're an awesome tennis player. Won the ATP championships twice. People forget that he won Olympic gold. Been in 3 finals. In that sense, it was just great to see him get the monkey off his back. But I just think about how long it took him to lower his toss. The toss was high. Then it was really high and not so high, and he's really lowered his toss. But yeah, there's, the 3 lies of the serve. You come around the ball for slice, you come over the ball for topspin, you go straight through for flat. So many people think that you can hit straight down. Braden used the number 14-6. Have to get up on a ladder. There's actually a photo of Vic on a ladder. Someone on a ladder at 14 feet, 6 inches is the apex, and then just a string going down to the court. People see their target through the net, and they see their target straight ahead. So kids will put that racket in a palm-up position and think they can hit flat. The bread and butter is to hit the topspin serve. The slice serve curves away from the target. I think of a clock face. If it's a right-hander, you're going to bypass the ball at 3 o'clock. The righty is going to go from 7 to 1 across the back of the ball. And then flat, you go, 6 to 12. You're hitting up on all 3 serves, though. But go ahead. What comes to your mind?
Well, I think that we talk about how Braden was so far ahead of his time in regard to tennis teaching and information. And I think from what I'm seeing anyways, that the tennis world has started to realize that, tossing somewhere right around your peak rather than extremely high is more advantageous. And so that's good to see that his information is starting to get a little traction after all of those years, being that the ball tossed extremely high, falling at the rate of gravity at 32.2 feet per second squared, and shoots through your hitting zone so quickly. You have more time, but less time in the actual hitting zone where you're going to meet the ball. And I feel like that's a battle that in teaching people to serve these days, it's a battle that feels like it's easier to win than it was 15, 20 years ago. So I'm glad that part is catching up. But I think that when I think of the serve, I think of, my world working around kids primarily, and I think that it's harder to teach a serve in some ways now because the level of athletic ability that is walking through the door, whether beginners, intermediates, or even perceived advanced players. I think the athletic component has really changed. I think it was much stronger several decades back. I think kids multi-sported a little bit more, and the throwing motion just wasn't such a foreign thing. But now I've got really, good national level players that just can't throw a ball. And I think it's more difficult to get them to serve well.
So many things come to my mind that in World War II, the Americans were throwing grenades, and the Germans had the grenades on a 6 to 8-inch rod, and the Germans would go, "Whoops." And, they were just throwing it very much like a javelin, and the Americans throwing the grenades were just so accurate. Wasn't fair for women back in the day, but everyone played baseball. You'd go to a picnic, and you'd play catch with your uncle, throwing a ball back and forth. And
Yeah.
if the palm went up, the term was you threw like a girl. It wasn't fair to girls, and girls thought it was a muscular activity. They put the ball in their hand like it was a shot put. Richard Williams throwing rackets. Maureen Conley, that's one of the first drills I remember learning in my journey in tennis, is the film made for TV, Little Mo, and just throwing rackets. I think just even if you have just one old beat up racket, to throw that in the side yard and then work on your running mechanics. Then Ben Shelton comes to my mind right now with, he wanted to be a quarterback. And, you just think of myelin. The more myelin the body produces, the speed and smoothness of movement. And I remember Matt Clore being in the room where, someone was telling Ben to toss high. Bradenism, you toss high for more time. No, you toss high for more moving parts. The higher you toss, the greater your chance to be crummy. So you program your swing. The riddle is, does the racket find the toss? Does the toss find the racket? And here in the air pocket, the cadence is count 1, 2, 3. You can substitute words in like turn, toss, throw. And the cadence 1, 2, 3. But if your toss is high, typically you're going to have a hitch. In other words, you're going to stop the racket, and then you got to start it all over again. Start from ground level 0. Your turn.
Yeah, I think, diagnostic tennis teaching, a term you taught me years ago. We go with grip, swing, grip, swing, body. The fourth component would be on the serve, grip, swing, body, toss. And why don't we kind of cover those and start with the grip, and we can both talk about that a little bit and then go on from there. But
Yeah, no, for sure. You could start at the top with the head. You could start with the feet, start with the grip. It's interesting. Most young players, they now have a composite grip on their forehand volley and a continental grip. I have to get it right here. Years ago, they had a continental grip on their forehand volley and a composite grip on their serve, like almost continental. Now I think they're both. They're getting a little tongue-tied here, but players are not using a continental on either, but you want to use a continental grip on the serve and on the overhead, and then balls hit behind you in emergency shot. So, yeah, getting the grip right. If someone has the grip right, the base knuckle and heel pad are on the second panel, so a righty counting to the right, 1, 2. You want to cup the racket like you're putting your hand, when you put a little water in your hand, you tilt the hand upward. Milos Raonic is somebody you remember years ago, he really exaggerated that movement. And then that movement's the same when you go to the backswing. We call it, we're pitcher method, the cobra position. You come around and right before you release it, snap the form upward. It's the football throwing position. But spreading the index finger, people do like their hand off the racket. It was interesting. Welby, for example, Welby Van Horn. I was blown away where someone sent me a tape, and it was the number one tennis tip for Welby is have your hand on the racket. It is a little bit longer lever. I remember Michael Chang going to a 29-inch racket. I've had parents do that, and I told them not to do it, is they have their player, because they're shorter, is say, okay, we'll get a longer racket. I wouldn't recommend that. I would recommend, where are the biggest power sources? And it's going to be from the ground up. you push against the ground pushes back. And then how you use your body as a kinetic chain. I was always disappointed with Roddick. With he's done so much for tennis now with his voice through his podcast. But years ago, they'd asked him how he serves so big, and he said, "I don't know." And now he says it's all in the legs. And you have so many people that are trying to use their legs like it's an elevator. But you see kids trying to do pinpoint, whatever. But yeah, mom and dad, get the grip right. Get the grip of a lifetime. Your kid's going to want to go towards a forehand grip because they're going to want to swing straight ahead. They're not going to be able to conceptualize initially that it's a right-hander. Obviously, the lefty is just the opposite. You're going to go from left to right. You don't swing directly towards your target when you're hitting a serve or an overhead. But yeah, the grip of a lifetime. And then the thing is, you don't have the grip, then you have to make all these other adjustments with grip, swing, body, toss. I mean, if someone has a, a forehand grip, typically or close to a composite, how a lot of players learn how to hit a spin serve is they just arch their back and toss over their head. So now they are swinging left to right. They're swinging from 7 o'clock to 1 o'clock. They're swinging across the ball. They're swinging edge upward. But it'd be like taking a football and throwing it on the other side of your head. So it's very, very important to make sure that they have the right grip. Some players, like a baseball player moving their hand on a ball. I remember working with Mark Dixon. He was a great server. I remember gave my son Connor lessons. And at a really elite level, like a baseball pitcher, they move their hand around on the ball. So, people they can go a little bit closer to a backhand grip because it closes the racket face. And the angle of the racket face is down, the angle of the racket path goes up. But they don't have the flexibility as far as, how the forearm and wrist move at the end of the swing, the last segment. But no, the grip, don't hang out of the racket too tight. You only squeeze the racket right just prior to the hit. But yeah, anything else on the grip?
No, I mean, I think I agree 100% with what you said with, in this day and time. I think the perception of a continental grip is what, we would really consider a composite grip or the old Aussie grip. But I think of a pretty pure continental grip server in Roger Federer, and then the extreme moving the hand to the right side of the racket, a guy like Boris Becker. I think that the typical grip, it leaned one way to Federer or Becker that walks through the door these days. It leans more to Becker's side, and like you said, the biggest adjustments made with the toss to compensate, and it's a pretty key thing. But I think again, we talk about it all the time, developing that athletic ability. Getting a true continental grip's a hard change for people to. I mean, you said it before a million times, Steve. I've heard you. When somebody can, take a palm upper, or a tennis teacher can take a palm up player, or somebody serving on Eastern forehand, and then you look at them down the road and they've got the palm down, and and they have a true serving motion, a true throwing motion. That's somebody who can really teach tennis and coach. But let me ask you on the grip. There's so many people with regress palm up, just a version of palm up, even out on the people we're watching on TV. Do you feel so many that we watch that have that flaw, even though they're compensating to some degree, that it's a byproduct more of the grip, or do you think it's a pattern in that we're seeing people maybe teach it that way?
Well, I think more and more there's less and less instruction. Game-based training, action method is let's roll out the balls, let's move up, move down, let's just play. I don't think there's enough emphasis on, really teaching someone to serve well. And then what happens with young kids, they don't really find out that their serve's a liability until they're way down the road. I mean, let's face it, no one's getting free points in the 12s and 14s for the most part. There are the occasional 14-year-old who's already shaving on the boy side. But going back, I think it's great you mentioned Boris Becker because it is an inexact science. Is you don't want to constantly be changing. If initially follow the science, but that's where again, no substitute from a good beginning. But years ago, we were developing better players in America when kids were just taking one lesson a week and kids were staying home. They weren't traveling, going off to academies. But again, wasn't fair for girls, but people could throw a ball. People could catch. I mean, you really can't throw a football with your palm up. But no, coming back to regress palm up, a total palm up for listeners is a pizza position, patty cake. Regress palm up, and this really comes from many things. If you go too fast, if you're all arm, if you're a victim of down together, up together, and like once you point that racket up to the sky, now when the shoulder goes forward, the opposite equal reaction is the elbow bends. But what happens is now the racket goes backwards. The racket goes up. But you want to be in a position, we'd say brush your teeth, salute. When the loop is going to be formulated by the shoulder going forward. So when the shoulder goes forward, it should be your elbow bending in. So we're not demonstrating this. I know some people, not very many, look at these clips or these podcasts on YouTube, but it's 90 degrees, 180, another 180. Certainly we have all sorts of content. I know you do as well. 450 degrees of movement with a racket. But same thing is that like a volley, initially just turn on the serve, leave your hands alone, just turn like a baseball player taking the ball out of the glove. Well, I've worked with some Americans here recently that they didn't know what hand to put the baseball glove on. We have some baseball gloves courtside. But we say T-Rex, alligator arms. Don't let your hands go below your belly button. Leave your hands alone and turn. Actually, if you hang onto a continental grip, your palm is down. If you just open your hand up. What people do is they take basic information and, certainly they'll add their own movements to it. But one thing is there no information or misinformation? And, the trophy look. That's in my notes. I wrote down 10 servers. We can go through this list, but Les Stoffen, senior in the 30s, it was the artist, the sculptor, who wanted him to be like the high school yearbook. Even I always think of Roman Gabriel, quarterback of the LA Rams, where they just put themselves in a position where the left arm out in front, the ball in a position behind them. And I'd say more people teach the trophy position than not. And it's a myth. You're going to have your body turned, your left arm should be parallel to the baseline. And yeah, your arm is not in the position where you set the racket on edge. I always think of Martine Hingis, who was such a great player. I remember she played mixed doubles with John Lofton Diaga. You helped me coach him 100 years ago for a short term. And I said, hey, why don't you get your partner throwing some footballs? She did a little bit of work with Gilbert. And I love Brad Gilbert. But you need to show somebody how to throw the football. You can't just say, go throw the football. There's a film on YouTube of Tom Brady working with biomechanists, and he's, Brady at that time, it's in his backyard, and he's throwing footballs, and his kids are running around, and the biomechanist is saying, you got to stop the left shoulder, you got to stop the left side, make the right side go faster. But yeah, so then people will refinger. Coming back to the grip, is people will refinger the grip. If you watch a little kid, we call it the Frank Sinatra serve. I'm going to do it my way. So your kid, you start them off with the continental grip, and they turn, and then as they go up to hit the ball, they refinger it because they just desperately want to get the ball in the box, and they're going to follow logic, and they're going to swing straight ahead. So they need to maintain that grip. But then when they turn, very little arm action in the beginning of the serve. The rotation starts from the ground with the knees up. But mechanics, everything has to be working like a Swiss watch. But, again, like say with Becker, so he didn't have a true continental grip, but he had a great serve. And you think, well, actually, Andy Fitzgerald would be able to rattle the name off. I remember reading the Yugoslavian's book, former Yugoslavian book. I mean, I would butcher the name, but Brezkov, I'd butcher the name, and I shouldn't be in that position. I apologize for that, but there was 9 players. It was Steffi Graf was one, and Boris Becker was the other. And then to actually have someone spend a good part of the summer with us who was one of those 9 players and say, "Okay, what did you do?" And I remember making a videotape for this gentleman's son, and he said, "We didn't work on technique. We just worked. We just worked." And I do think, I mean, in a perfect world, if it's a pie graph, you get to the point where technique is a very small piece of the pie. You still work on technique, ideally before practice and after practice, warming up, cleansing your strokes at the end. But one thing is it's a sport of a lifetime. So, you're meeting someone who's 15 years old, and if they shift their head, so you've never met them before and you're filming them, if they shift their head on their serve, the brain's ahead of the hand, they sneak a peek, it's a pretty good chance, safe bet, that they've shifted their head their entire life. Every ball they've ever hit, they've shifted their head because no one's corrected them on that. So then you get into the hard wiring. It's like, whoa, the myelin, you got to deprogram, reprogram. So, wow. I mean, to get someone to change their stroke. So then, they say, well, my UTR, and I want to go play a tournament next week. And to make some changes, most people, 98%, I mean, not many people can compete and change at the same time. They should be able to. They should be able to. But, that winning monster, winning is a curse. And, almost a lot of lessons, you could just have a tape recorder and just push play, and you're saying the same thing time after time to people.
Yeah.
But with the swing, it's so important to realize that you're swinging left or right as a right-hander, but how you formulate the swing, you're going to be is completely different. Like Braden would say, the wrinkle in the wrist. And if you look at the contact point, I know Matt Clore, we talk about all the time, his work with the USTA. He has access to all these pros from the U.S. Open after U.S. Open hitting balls, and where's the racket at the impact point? That volleys and ground strokes, the wrist is going to be fixed. The racket's going to be aligned to the target. But then the movement of the serve and the movement of the overhead, loosey goosey. So Braden used to say, spaghetti is wet spaghetti, like a scarecrow, no muscles in the body. And what happens is people try to hit the ball hard. One thing you're teaching someone, go up and just talk about the grip is just right before they serve, just go up and pull the racket. And I always tell people, I grew up on a lake. I feel like the motorboat and they're the water skier. They just have they just have the death grip. You pull the racket and the kid comes with them. Years ago, a baseball kid, if they didn't have anybody to play catch with, they would throw the ball into their glove. And they just have that snapping action.
Yeah.
Where the last segment of the kinetic chain turns out the forearm. And, or they'd be tossing the ball up in the garage. And they'd have to throw the ball softly or they'd throw the ball over the garage. And then the ball would roll down and they were playing catch with a slanted roof. And then, they just turn and they do it over and over again. And then, Braden had the drill where, have a 2-inch toss where you just snap the ball. I was listening to a podcast with Jonathan Yandel. I remember when he came to Vic for advice years ago, and I was there working. And he made a major contribution to tennis with now Joel Trucker's running, tennisplayer.net.
Yeah.
Have all his old film of players. I mean, people should join that. I think it's only like $15 a month. And people who really didn't know Vic that well, like say Yandel, a lot of people didn't know Vic very well, but they thought they did because he was so friendly and he was in the public eye for such a long time. And just thought that he was just hung up on how Roscoe Tanner served instead of the information. And so people would watch Roscoe serve but Vic would say, in the history of the sport, right-handers loan out to the right, left-handers loan out to the left. And I guess we could do this, just go through this and come back to try to put some sense together with the grip swing body, the fundamentals grip swing body toss. I wrote down these 10 names very quickly.
Yeah.
Yannick Noah.
Hmm.
And I remember watching him at the US Open and remember being with Danny Cooper. And Danny Cooper went through our school of hard knocks. And because of that, he ended up running in Vic Braden Tennis College in Europe. And Yannick Noah would never worked with Braden, but he had a Braden serve.
Yeah.
Vic would be the first one to say there wasn't a Braden method. It's a method of physical loss. And then it's, the least amount of moving parts, least amount of muscle recruitment. Richard Krajicek is someone that listeners could look up, Wimbledon champion.
Hmm.
I'd like to think that Stan Frankert, who played tennis at USC, he used to come and hang around Vic in the tennis college. I did mention I get Les Stoffin's name down. I taught tennis with his son.
Hmm.
That's where the trophy look started. It's amazing, Vic knew it's amazing how people he knew. Pancho Gonzalez, talk about
Yeah.
a low toss, talk about effortless. I think we need to get into platform, pinpoint versus platform. But
Yeah.
a friend of our efforts in tennis sent me some film of Gonzalez just the other day, and they had a tournament where he only had one serve only, and he won it in easier fashion. But a lot of people wouldn't even know who Pancho Gonzalez is, but you could look up his serve. Sampras, what he did at age 19. The serve he had. Now, Sampras's toss is a little bit higher. Then to get into a debate is that you get to a certain point from a timing standpoint. Is if you watch Sampras, it's not like he had a severe hitch in his serve. So the timing, you can have a toss. It's not exactly at the apex. But, I think with Vic, certainly being on TV and emphasizing a point that most people toss too high. And, there's a range. The human being is not putting that toss in the same place every time. There's a range. Isner, certainly his size is a big plus, but just read not too long ago or heard on a podcast, Cahill, with Sinner, Yannick Sinner, they're just watching Isner. That's their resource, how to serve. 14,000 plus aces. We use Don Leary's word picture method. Sam Groth, look him up. Still has a record, 163.7 miles per hour. It's like a carbon copy of the word picture method. Almost like every image that we use is Sam Groth's serve. And certainly Sam Groth has had nothing to do with Don Leary or nothing to do with Vic Braden and some of the other mentors we have. I think of Karlovic. I certainly watched him practice so many times down at Balateri's. I didn't live being in Tampa for 15 years, wasn't so far from Balateri's. I can remember with Austin Krajicek working with them. One of his teammates from Texas A&M was with him. And so we're working on standing in close, and it's another topic is the return of serve. I just can't get over how people stand so far back. Is just attack the return like Connors, that gets away from the serve. But Karlovic's second serve, how high it bounces. But when it does bounce, I mean, he's not in the public eye playing now, but he's similar to Isner and a little bit taller actually. But when the ball bounces, it's at the same level as the paint on the court. I mean, to me, I think it'd be great if, like they do in baseball, I'd love to see them modify the equipment where there's not so many free points won off the serve. But with that being said, they're not changing the technology of the equipment with the serve, but we need to change the technology of how people return serve. I mean, the time Medvedev, was he 19 times? He's way behind the baseline in one match. Sampras does Djokovic does the can opener, hits a slice serve wide, comes in, and he's not even really serving volleying that much. I mean, he's improved so much, but Raonic comes to my mind because we had that podcast with our friends from the Richmond Hill Club and Richmond Hill, Thornhill, that area in Greater Toronto suburb. But Jeremy Langer, who has a record of some sort, for winning the most matches at the University of Indiana. Not nearly the size of Raonic, but Raonic is all of a sudden, he's 18 years old. He has a growth spurt, and he's a big boy, and he's hitting a huge serve. But if you say, okay, let's take the serve out of tennis, or some of the top players in the world after the first 4 shots, they go from being a world class player to being, say, okay, the level of, not to take anything away from him, but the level of a much lower ranked player.
Yeah.
The Andy Roddick. Well, going back to Raonic, I would think, always talking to people about stage fright. I'll never forget. He wins a big tournament. He's in the arena where the San Jose Sharks play, and man, I couldn't believe how good he was with a microphone. That maturity, no stage fright, no insecurities. But Andy Roddick, when he served 155, and that was certainly in the news. The return came back. Agassi returned the serve. I think the story is he returned it for a winner. But
Yeah.
But with those players, those 10 players serving with the listeners, there's far more similarities than there are differences. But I think it's exciting. The rumor is more exciting. In fact, let's talk about all their differences. Van Horn, who was such a great tennis teacher, used to say he never got a person to hit the ball the way he wanted to. But on the other side, the flip side, Arthur Ashe said you could tell a Welby student from a mile away. Braden's term, your serve, all your strokes, you get to the point they go from efficient to effortless to elegant. Roger Federer, you made it look like ballet. Just watching how someone comes off of the serve, like Agassi, he would sit down, a little bit too much knee flexion, but the toss wasn't far enough out to the right. But you got to listen to Agassi. He said, well, I wish I got free points. I never got free point in my life. And he had 2 really good second serves, and a guy like Federer struggled more against Agassi's serve than he did against Roddick's. So, just so many things. I don't think people practice the serve enough. I remember reading where Kevin Anderson served 100 serves a day, and I remember being at IMG one time and saying, okay, I'll just sit here and watch him hit his 100 serves. But go ahead, back to the mechanics, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to throw a couple of names out because, I think Kevin Curran, we've had Steve Denton on the podcast. Curran serve always comes to mind. And then, a current day player that I think people can pick a lot of great things up is Casper Ruud. I think he does a great job, with that 3 count, getting the toss pretty much right around its peak. Somebody, your son, Connor, has played Dustin Brown. And then I always think of, when I think of the serve, I think of a guy who just had his 70th birthday, Bjorn Borg, and how, it ties in with what you were talking about. You should be able to compete and play, and you can tell the story better than I, Steve, but how, Borg getting knocked out of the French Open and really altering his serve in that period between the French and Wimbledon to, I think, kind of change the course of history in regard to his career.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I'll come back to that, but Kevin Curran, watch him on YouTube. He did lose to Boris Becker in the 85 final, but I think I have it in order. He beat Edberg, Connors, and McEnroe in the previous matches. I think Casper Ruud and Jessup Pegula would be 2 good examples right now. You go back to like a Mats Wilander. It's like he just came out of a book. I mean, he was so simple, so efficient. Pegula could definitely make some adjustments on her serve, but Dustin Brown with the Wittenbergs, Kim, the older brother than Scott. He's Jamaican, but he actually grew up in Barsinghausen, Germany, and that's where the headquarters were for the Vic Braden Tennis College. And I do think that Dustin, drove Kim probably more crazy than Scott, because he would just try anything in every shot. He was just so creative, but he did force. And I ran a camp in Germany with Andy Fitzel, and actually Joey Johnson was part of that. So Scott brings his son, we just helped him with college placement, Sam, and did video work. But he had just returned to us from Wimbledon where Dustin Brown beat Nadal. But Borg, yeah, he was injecting Novocaine into his stomach in '76 when he won Wimbledon, and he did lose to Pinata, and Pinata was just handing the trophy out 50 years later. Borg played the French 8 times, won it 6. He lost twice. He lost to Pinata. Now I'm not sure if you can see that match, but there's a match of high quality as far as the video of Pinata and Borg playing. You watch the whole match on YouTube. But yeah, you got the toss out to the right, and all of a sudden he had a first serve, and it changed. Yeah, and that year at Wimbledon, there was a drought, '76, and the court played very much like a hard court. And and Borg too. Also, he went to a heavier racket, but he had a lot of play, especially on the backhand volley. But he came in. It's like John McEnroe, age 17, he was a baseliner, but it was just accepted if you're going to play at that level. It's like Jack Kramer's father said to him, well, now you got to play with the boy. Now you're the number one. They used to call it boys. You're the number one 18-year-old boy, not junior, but boy in the country. And now you got to play with the men. And that meant, be killed or be killed. And when you were serving, it's like, when you watch players, even recently at the French Open, is that when you're serving, you don't want your opponent to be at the net. It really should be where, okay, I'm serving. I want to serve well enough where I can dictate the point, and I want to be the one who's forcing. But yeah, the whole thing about clay and changing your direction, it's more, you got to be a little bit more patient. You got to be able to hit deeper, the frequency of shots, but that gets away from the topic of the serve. But the overheads, and just an abbreviated, we talked about that not too long ago, is they're like brother and sister. I mean, if you have problems on your overhead, you have problems on your serve. You have problems on your serve, you have problems on your overhead. Most kids don't even attempt overheads. But yeah, again, Casper Ruud and Jessica Pegula, very, very good players to watch, because especially for players starting out, learning how to play, is you've got to get a solid foundation. We say great base. You got to have a platform to build your game upon.
Steve, let me ask you, go into a time machine on word picture method and going back. We did a lot of teaching of the serve using the kind of phrases with the palm of the hand, palm down, palm in, palm flat, palm out. How often do you feel those are a part of your teaching, your terminology now?
Well, I had an 8-year-old teaching a 6-year-old yesterday and said, okay, show the 4 drills for the serve throwing the ball.
Yeah.
And drill number 1 is just throw the ball. You're about 6 feet from the net. You hang on to the ball, your first 3 fingers, your thumb, forefinger, middle finger, and you're just hanging on the fingertips, and you shadow swing 1. And by that time, we were already taught body balance, and they're going to be at a 45-degree angle, standing tall at a 45-degree angle, from their nose at a 45-degree angle. And they throw the ball, over their right arm over left. So the next is we're going to do a throwing motion, but they catch the ball. So they toss and catch, but they catch with the throwing motion. So it's just some key words. After you just throw, it's going to be catch, and then it's going to be collide. So the next one is you hang on to 2 tennis balls, and you don't let go of the ball in your right hand. And again, our lefties would be for the left, but you just turn, you toss, and then you have to hit it with a throwing motion. And then the last one is you just turn, toss, and throw. Turn, toss, and throw. And then you're always talking about Kobe Bryant, the sport I grew up in. Players are still doing the same stick handling drills. Like when they're warming up for a basketball game, they're warming up for a hockey game. They're doing the same drills they did when they were in Pee-wees, when they were just, in youth basketball, just starting out.
Mhm.
So no, I have people just throw and catch. I have young players. I don't let both players have a tennis racket. One, they don't play as much tennis. They don't get as many reps. So with young kids, you want to work on cooperative skills, but you want to work on athletic skills as well. So again, you said it when we opened up here is that people don't have the skills to throw the ball anymore. So okay, what we're going to do is we're going to be creative and play tennis baseball, or we'll call you the human ball machine, and you've got to catch it and you got to throw it back. Obviously, for really younger players or they're just working out technique from the beginning, we use the foam ball and have them toss underhand like they're playing softball. But then they're at least catching and they're developing ball sense. But no, right from the get go. But you said it earlier, and people think we're doom and gloom on this podcast. Division One tennis players, men and women, it's a safe bet. You go to watch. There's 12 of them playing. None of them have a palm down throwing motion. They'll have. That's just the times. That's just the times. I mean, it was different back in the day where there was wiffle ball, softball, baseball, and people would go to PE classes, and it was just un-American. And my mother's line was un-American not to play baseball. I was never a baseball player, but I could look like a baseball player. I just couldn't hit because it's just something. If you don't do it over and over again, you're not going to be good at it. But it's just back in the day, everybody could in America, in my opinion, it's like everybody could go play in a softball game. Everybody could know. They knew where to stand when they were batting. They knew how to swing a bat. They knew where first base was, second base, and then they knew they could field. They had to field a ball and throw a ball. So no,
Yeah.
a kid should find a wall and throw against it. But now what they do is how much time are they on their phone? And like Steve Denton, you mentioned his name. Vic Braden used to show his film twice a week, the Monday through Friday group and the Saturday Sunday group, and talked about his body coil. But he was a baseball pitcher, and there's many people that played baseball. That was their sport, but they just overnight were a really good thrower. I remember Vic Braden saying that Don Drysdale, he goes, "I'll teach you to serve in no time," but he realized that Drysdale threw sidearm. He didn't throw over his shoulder.
Hmm.
But with so he still knew how to turn that forearm out and a snapping action. It's all about generating force. You need to maximize the force at the contact point. Yes. Um, but yeah, what else you got on the serve?
Well, I think on the swing, I was going to just lead you into it and let you talk on, because we touched on it already about the different ranges that the racket goes through. But if you want to talk about, we call it, I've always just kind of called it power loop, the movement occurring to the rear of the body. I certainly grew up in the tennis boom era and was taught down together, up together, scratch your back and all that. Luckily for me, I was kind of a bad student, so I didn't listen. But I think that the loop that occurs, the horizontal loop, if you want to kind of elaborate on that, because I think that's it's still to this day, I think that's an area that is very misinterpreted. I think people are unaware it even exists and the capacity that it does.
Yeah, no, watching Mira Andreeva win the French, I can remember when she was interviewed for the first time, this kid's got no stage fright. And that has so much to do with it. No insecurities, smile on her face. She's got a big serve. She serves so well, but she's got some extra arm movement in the beginning. And does she really need to change for the sake of change? But Kyrgios, he's playing some basketball for fitness probably, and he's going to step up the line, and he's going to, he can not be playing tennis, and he's going to have one of the best serves in tennis because of what you're talking about, that horizontal plane. And he really doesn't have, that much body rotation when he starts out, but he's got the toss low and out to the right. And it's out to the right and it's in front. So there's 3 dimensions to the toss. Most people toss too high. Say a right-hander, they toss to the left. and they toss too far back. They got all three. And that's the idea of throwing the racket. Where does the racket generate the most force? I know Andy Fitzell's always demonstrating this is where, it comes from Braden, where you break the sound barrier. You can just hear the shadow swing, but where's that racket generating the most force? And you can't see it with the human eye, but the racket, we always say you don't scratch your back unless your back itches. You can't see it with the human eye, but we call it the shelf, like you're clearing, it comes from Braden, like you're clearing the shelf. And for the top players, it's about 5 feet long. Now, what happens is that when people toss over their head, they could have a really good looking serve, like Jimmy Connors. Connors look good, look good, look good. So he turns his body, does so many things well, but he was a lefty. So his toss was too far to the right. And then he had forces going in two directions that were counterproductive. He was collapsing and opening up. So he's going backwards at hip level and his body's spinning out. But he was a lefty. He can move it around. It's what you do behind the serve. It's amazing how, he didn't get, free points. There's only one player, I think, who wasn't intimidated. It was VJ Armitage and said, Jimmy, you can attack his serve. He did improve his serve. He worked with Gideon Ariel. He worked with Braden, and he definitely, we mentioned that previously on a podcast where Gloria Connors wrote a thank you note. It was in Vic's library. But yeah, that's where Kyrgios, he generates so much racketed speed. It's physics. It's physics. Not, well, he's got a live arm. He's got an attitude. I think attitude does have something to do with it. I know Danny Cooper and Greg Rosetsky in Montreal. Rosetsky ended up playing for England. I understand he has a podcast. I haven't checked it out, but I need to. Cooper said he just was one of those kids is that he just tried to hit it, when he was really young. That's so important is that, the kid who's fearless and not going, I just want to get this in. We could do things where, okay, you get 3 serves, instead of saying you get a second serve. Really young kids, if the people that were making decisions in developmental tennis, young kids wouldn't have to serve in the box. A young kid should be able to stand in the middle of the court and serve anywhere in the court. Seriously. Or they could just serve on one side. They don't have to get it in the box. Because, they should really be like a kid playing baseball or softball, and they're out in the outfield, and they got to throw it up over second base into home plate, that long throw. And, kids go for years. It's like, you can meet someone that could be 13 years old. They started when they were 8, and they've served 5 years with almost a forehand grip. We just say pizza position, pull down instead of salute position, twist up. So then, it's bad myelin. And I think you got to talk to a kid like he's an adult and go, you've been doing this. I told a young boy from Minnesota this today. He's 13 years old. He's athletic. I said, you've hit thousands and thousands of serves where he displaces force. His feet actually skip backwards because he's big enough at 13 now with palm up. He's putting the air currents on the bottom part of the ball. So he's got to take force away. That's what displaced means. He's actually jackknifing. He's going backwards. And, that's where you don't want to underestimate the capacity of the learner. Say, hey, kids, and, the Bradenisms, so you have to really think, well, they may not understand what a grenade is anymore. Like yourself, your dad, my dad, my father was in World War II, and all my friends' fathers in this small village in upstate New York in World War II. We knew what a grenade was. And Braden used to say, your serve is like a grenade. You're throwing it up and running underneath it. Or you can read the label on your own serve. You don't want to serve and volley this way. You'll beat your own serve to the net. Like Braden in his doubles, someone's got no service motion. They get palm up and their partner's standing next to him on the baseline. And, why are you doing this? I want to live. Your serve should be a plus. The ball's hit 3 ways, plus minus IP. And you want to really work on the positives from your serve is, okay, you can get a free ace. They could get the racket on it, but they don't get the ball back. Or they hit a weak shot. So, That's what you need to have off of your serve. If your serve is just neutral, um, yeah, so you're going to get, and a lot of that happens with a lot of players. They they become nationally ranked here in the U.S. and they end up they were one of the better juniors in the country, and they go to college and they play bottom of the lineup. They don't play doubles, and that's because they never learned to serve. Never learned to serve.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What else?
Well, you said a couple of things in there that triggered some memories with me. One, an idea that, and that's the fun part about these podcasts, is it seems to stir up a lot of thoughts where I like, man, I haven't done that in a while. But I went to one camp as a kid, had 2 private lessons, had one camp, and I was fortunate to get to go to Steve Wilkinson's tennis and life camp. The one thing we had to do it was a 4-day, it was a mini camp. We weren't allowed to put a ball in play underhand. You couldn't put it into play in a traditional sense. You put the ball in play. Say we were doing a baseline drill. You put the ball in play to whatever the situation was with a serve, not with the intent of hitting an ace, but just initiating, putting the rally in play. And I think that idea was brilliant. And I know tomorrow morning I'm going to use it on the court because, again, just building the rep, building the throwing motion, and then developing a little bit of a steering wheel for your serve, through being able to kind of hit a modified spin serve to a person to begin a baseline game or whatever the drill is. But that memory from Wilkinson, I think he was onto something with that. And then the second one, I remember this, hearing this years ago, and I know you could elaborate on it because I think I only met this coach one time, but I remember you speaking about Mary Lay out at Dick's, and how when she taught the serve, she'd take the net down. And maybe I heard that incorrectly. It was decades ago. But I'll let you talk about that and anything you want to add.
Well, one thing, Mary Lay, she, if you get the copy of Tennis for the Future, the first copy, maybe in Tennis 2000. Anyway, Tennis 2000 is updated version. I know Dave Secker at NC State, he's saying with Braden's book, you just need to get new photos. But Mary Lay, she played UCLA. She was the boss, head coach. And yeah, I learned a lot from Mary Lay. But anything that I would say Mary was saying with Vic, Vic would have 2 nets. Is that what you're referring to, hitting up more? I got that
Yeah.
wrong. Yeah, Chrissy Everett Vic had balloons. Chrissy Everett's father, Jimmy Everett, has 2 nets with, the height of the serve, the depth of the serve, where the serve lands. Getting people to hit targets. It's a pretty safe bet that right-handed players, lefties will do it to the ad court. Right-handed player, they're going to hit every serve out wide because they're going to sneak a peek. They're going to shift their head, brains ahead of the hand, and then inch for inch, the head's the heavy part of the body. So goes the eye, so goes the head, so goes the trunk, the largest body part. Body's the leader. So they're hitting a second serve deuce court to a right-hander out wide. And that just needs to be pointed out to them. They need to be able to hit to the tee. They need to be able to hit to the body, but they don't even know. They don't even know. It's kind of like the story everybody's heard. It's not a very nice story. There's the death involved. So you take a pot of water, you put it on the stove, you turn the stove up to burn to high. The water starts to boil, but you put a frog in the cold water, and as the water boils, the frog dies because they don't know that their environment's constantly changing. And, what's going to happen? It's like Jimmy Connors. He was always a great player, but he didn't become a great, great player until he got to be an older kid and the return to serve was more important. People don't even talk about Connors' return. You hit against a backboard off a wooden surface and steal the ace. Just, line up like a volley and just wall to the ball. And, he would be airborne. I mean, his body would be extended into a power line, and he would attack the serve. But no, so with kids serving, they should be able to tomorrow morning you work with some players. Okay, jog around the court, take your racket. As you jog, have a throwing motion with your dominant hand. The righty's the right, lefty's the left. Okay, now switch hands. And then have play catch, right-handed, throwing over the net or their dominant hand. Okay, now switch. Let's see you throw the ball left-handed. If they do those type of things a little bit every day, and you call everybody in and say, okay, everybody get the football out of your bag. Okay, another thing is, okay, out of your bag, everybody get the sock with 3 balls in it. And guaranteed they don't have a football in their bag. Guaranteed they don't have the sock and they don't use it. But that's the type of thing is that, no, they told me to do this. And it's like, okay, I do it every day. And that's how a guy like Steph Curry, how do he get so good? Is that he just got in the gym and he just kept doing the same thing over and over again. I'm sure our listeners know how Kobe Bryant would teach the little kid to play basketball. He'd stand 1 foot from the basket and, he had a number, maybe it was 30. Once you can get 30 in a row, and not until you get 30 in a row, you're only 1 step from the basket. Now what you do is you move 1 step back, and now you get 30 in a row. And then after you get 30 in a row, you can't move back till you get 30 in a row. Then now you move back 1 more step. And, the people become great at something, they have that type of tenacity. At the French Open, what's it say about tenacious?
From Roland Garros, the fighter pilot. It's gosh, I'll think of it. I literally just looked that up about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, it's victory goes to the most tenacious, I think, something like that.
Yeah, something like that.
Here's something on the serve. Dennis Vandermeer, the riddle I mentioned earlier. Does the toss find the swing or does the swing find the toss? Dennis used to tease people, say, I teach a private lessons, $24,000, cash please, and I'll teach you the toss for $24,000. But I'm telling our listeners, if you ask people tomorrow, what's more important, the toss or the swing? People are going to say the toss. But that's where Bobby Riggs made a lot of money. He said, I'll play you every other game. I'll wear a blindfold and I'll beat you. And, he could hit all these amazing serves, against club players, and he would win blindfolded on a serve. He wasn't blindfolded when they were serving. But it is the swing. Program the swing, toss to the swing. You should be able to hit a serve with your eyes closed. Now, if your toss is too high, if your toss is too far back, if you have a throwing motion, you're going to have, it's like, say, for example, Andy Roddick, his first serve was almost 4.5 feet into the court. Now his body's leaning forward. His shoulder socket is at the baseline. There's his arm extended and his racket extended. And you're going to be able to generate some racket hit speed. Now he had some gyrations, some his own idiosyncrasies on his serve, but at the impact point, he had the power line. He was right there. Boom. Body leaning in at 45, body segments at a 45. And, he was, 3 times in the Wimbledon final. He had one of the best serves during his era. But he had a toss that was way out in front. And through self-discovery, name of the South African, my son worked with him when he was with the USTA. He should come to me here in a second.
Yeah.
But he did not teach Andy Roddick to serve. He made statements over and over. And Andy tells the story. He was just frustrated, and he put his hand right in the salute position. And that's how someone would, not when you're going to throw a football a long ways, the long ball, the Hail Mary, but if someone's going to throw a down and out bullet, they put their racket right there in the salute position. We call it the quarterback position as well. Roddick just put it there, out of frustration, hit a ball, and boom, the rest was history. He learned the serve through trial and error. Stanford, Boston was coaching him at that time. And the speed of the backswing has nothing to do with the power supply. Agassi at one time had abbreviated swing. Sharapova had abbreviated swing. People used to make fun of Jay Berger. He got to be top 10 in the world. And certainly we teach the rhythm of having a full swing. But you're much better off to have someone put the racket in the salute position and work on a serve than versus put your racket in the back scratch position. Doesn't mean that you would never teach a back scratch as a corrective measure. Say, for example, you're teaching some kid who's coming from England or South Africa or somewhere where he's played cricket and they don't bend their arm. So you can even use a myth or a misconception Braden, you say, if you got to stand on your head to get somebody to hit the ball better, you stand on your head. But no, to have little kids, we do this. We do a drill called Elvis Presley 2, snap down. Elvis on a skateboard, snap down. So we put, you can put, you can do it with three players on each side, but they have to be pretty skilled to do that. So it's better with two. You can do it with four. And you can do it with various type balls, but, this wouldn't work with a foam ball. But you put a kid on the other side. So one kid's just tossing the ball out in front, snapping down. We know on the serve you got to snap up. But the kid on the other side, say they're a righty, they got to catch the ball with their left hand. And right from where they are, they got to turn, and then they snap the ball down. And so they're working on athleticism because they have to move and catch the ball. And catch the ball with your left hand, and right from there, just turn. And then you get them to see who can make the ball bounce the highest. And if they're going to do that, they're going to generate force. They have to get the ball way out in front. First of all, you do the drill where you put people on, say, the baseline, say, okay, hit down before the service line. They can't do the drill unless they toss out in front. They can't do the drill out in front. You can have a lot of fun. You got to understand the basics. And then if you really understand the basics, then you can be creative. I think you have to innovate before you have to imitate before you innovate. You really have to spend a lot of time with basics. I think that's something that's really bad on the internet is that people are being really creative and they don't, it's pretty obvious they don't understand basics. Like the strings need to go in the direction of your target. Here's one thing, which again, perhaps repetition, but practicing the serve to the nth degree. You hang a string from the ceiling, little piece of tape. You don't have to have the Velcro and the flyaway ball. Put a little piece of tape, outstretched arm and racket. And then you put up mirrors. You get a tripod, you get a camera, and you have a practice log. And then you make a poster of the images from the word picture method. And I'm telling you, if a kid does that before they go to school and before they go to bed, okay, you can film it. And then the parents could look at it. And the parents could send it to the coach. But it's not like, okay, I do that once a week. I do that every day. And, some people are fortunate enough where they could have space in their house where the tripod's always set up and you just come in and just push the camera. And that gets back to the Braden word. You could have an elegant serve, a serve that looks like a Richard Krajicek's or some of the names I mentioned earlier. Isner has a serve that was just, he's a big guy, but his serve is just easy. It just looks like he serve in his sleep. The Stan Smith 72, we should mention that, or we're reviewing the serve, the Stan Smith 72. And, that's where when you ask kids, we have a system. A system's just an organized plan. And, ours is a system of systems. I've heard Stan Smith give this speech in a number of different decades now. People don't even know who Stan Smith is. Maybe they know the shoe. But, Wimbledon champion. And I think perhaps his story is exaggerated maybe by a year or so, but he became a Wimbledon U.S. Open champion. At one point, he was told he was too clumsy to be a ball boy. I used to take lessons from Jim Verdick. Side story. I was with Peter Smith, Stan Smith, myself, Steve Smith, and we're at the NCAs, and Stan's, talking about his coach from USC. I got to I'm losing my mind here. Who taught him how to volley when he was a college student at USC. But when he was a college student at USC, he couldn't play as a freshman. People should know that. People are just in a hurry to go nowhere fast. Just his coach's name will come to me in a second. But his father used to put him on a bus, Stan Smith. He'd go from Pasadena. Where's Redlands?
Isn't it?
It's a good bus ride, a good long bus ride away. Anyway, it's it's in Southern Cal, but it's inland.
Yeah.
And so he would go take lessons. And at that time, I think it was Doug Verdick who beat Stan Smith 6-0, 6-0. But anyway, Stan Smith, Wimbledon champion. And we used to call his serve the All-American serve because he didn't have a rocking motion. Stan he just started with his weight on his back foot and he went forward. It was the Aussies that came in who had and you don't have to go, like we say, bathroom scale 1 to bathroom scale 2. You don't have to rotate that way. You gotta rotate, but you could start with your weight back. It's kinda like Pete Sampras has a front foot cocked up and his leg is straight. And we really tell people, no, you're best to get on the ball of your foot like a pivot foot in basketball, the mashed potato. That front foot pivots on the serve. But with Stan Smith, three basic serves: topspin, flat, and slice. Singles, 3 places on the baseline. So the 3 times 3 is 9. Then 4 targets. So that's 36. So that's to the deuce court and 36 to the ad court. So 72 serves. So he does that as a clinic. Says, okay, you got 72 serves to go out and practice. And I know that we don't spend enough time on hitting various spins. Okay, let's work on the slice serve. Let's work on the topspin serve. One thing is when kids are really young, they should just work on a basic throwing motion, basic service motion, just like they do in baseball. In baseball at a really young age, they're not teaching people to throw knuckleballs and curveballs and sliders. That's not my world, but they are teaching them, okay, let's have really good mechanics. But as kids get older, you can vary the toss slightly. You don't want to just telegraph, if you toss way over your head, you can only hit top. We have kids toss way over their head so they get the feeling of the edge going up, so you don't want to do this long term. It's like we do a drill, we named it after Vandermeer, where Dennis would have people bring the racket behind their back. When you look at a really good server, they're on the baseline, it looks like their racket is going in the direction of the baseline they're standing on. Just like when someone hits a topspin lob, we say, okay, let your racket go like an elevator. If you're hitting a drive, let your racket go up a flight of stairs. But when you do that with your serve, you're not slowing down. You're swinging with the same full force, but you're just imparting more spin. It's amazing. Like Nadal, he's won the French 14 times, and he's swinging vertically on both sides with the forehand. I mean, there are so many players at the French, they were missing because they were early. And you could just look at a player, like say Menzik. He had a great tournament, but it's almost like a safe bet to go, yeah, I think he spent some time trying to snap the racket over at the contact point instead of really lifting with the thighs, lifting with the shoulders. I think we need to talk a little bit more about the body, the grip, the swing.
I think starting from the ground up and the myth of knee bend versus hip and knee flexion, and and then we can go from there maybe into pinpoint and platform.
Yeah, the rotation starts from the ground up. And, Braden used to do that with taking a basic piece of paper and then rolling it up and say, okay, this is my telescope, and I'm just going to look at the feet, with whatever stroke it is. Here's another Bradenism. You walk into a stadium, close your eyes and say, I'm just looking for red. And it's amazing how red just jumps out. Then you close your eyes, say, okay, I'm going to open my eyes and look for blue. It's amazing when you watch people play tennis. So you have the spectators and the players. They're just watching the ball go back and forth. I mean, I always tease and say, this is a tennis audience. Today we had one player working with another player just teaching them the art of dropping a ball for another player. Just drop it straight out of your hand. And, this is going to be their contact point. Just drop it straight down to the contact point. And then they look and see where the ball went. No, don't look at where the ball goes. The ball's round, the ball's yellow. Look at the player. Look at the player. But the stance, people aren't going to argue about the stance with a follow shot. They're not going to argue about the stance coming out of the blocks as a sprinter. Now, the one thing about most players have the same stance both between deuce court and ad court. Well, that's a positive. There's always two sides to the story. It's a positive. They just have one stance. But what's most efficient is to have your feet lined up like you're standing on a skateboard. So the deuce court is a righty. You're pointing in that direction. So the lefty would be the opposite. So then you go to the other side. Your front foot remains the same, but you change your back foot. But you have to tell someone either you're in or you're out. Which one are you going to use? I'm not talking pinpoint or platform right now. I said, are you going to stand with a foot
Yeah.
behind you? So if you're a righty and you have your right foot behind you and you're serving, that gives you a false sense of body rotation, and that supports the toss over your head. And then also too is that if you're gonna fight it, but no problem. In some ways, that's a plus. Well, okay, and if have stubbornness work for you, you're going to do it this way. It's not the biggest priority on the serve, but if you want to really go by the book and do what's most efficient, this is how you're going to stand. And we're not going to talk about copying the pros. We're going to talk about just studying information to be fundamentally sound. And then for rhythm, we have people start forward and then come back. That's bathroom scale 1, bathroom scale 2. Vandermeer used to have 2 bathroom scales on the court, and he taught that rhythmic movement from front to back. Whereas I mentioned Stan Smith, John Newcomb was, they were both at one time fighting for who's going to be number 1 in the world. He had what was called a rocking motion. So the front to back is called just that, rocking motion. But you got to choose which one you're going to do. Well, I mean, one thing I like about the rocking motion is you unweight yourself. That's why Vandermeer had 2 bathroom scales. Most of your weight is on bathroom scale 1. And as you go back, then most of your weight goes on bathroom scale 2. You're unweighting yourself. That's what a biomechanist would say. And then by unweighting yourself, now it's easy to turn the left knee in and left hip in. And that's something that's just not emphasized enough. The left hip turning in, it goes towards the net post to the right. And then Braden would say, and you freeze the left hip. You stop. You can use the term deceleration, acceleration, but you're going to just basically turn that hip in. So that's where a Becker, who didn't have a continental grip, but if you watch what he did with his legs, and the other thing too is he did it over and over and over again. And then it's a pretty good bet that Becker, he got locked into a service motion and he wasn't changing it. Raven Clausen, who we spent a lot of time with, I know Raven, worked with him. He was with us for almost 5 years, and he was number 1 in South Africa, and he changed all his strokes. Some were drastic changes, some we say major surgery or Band-Aid. And people would approach him and start telling him how to hit tennis ball, and he'd say, well, wait a minute. I've invested a lot of time in doing it this way. And you can always, we have kids go off to college, and we say, all right, you're going to have a coach tell you something. You got to listen. You got to be polite, obedient, respectful, but you have to have a BS detector. I mean, are they telling you, a line of baloney? But it's your game and you got to stand for it. Say, no, this is why I'm doing it. And I found most of the time, if a student has knowledge and they present that to the coach, they have a much better chance than if they do just the opposite. They call their mother up and say, hey, this is a problem. Is they just, man to man, woman to woman, say, this is why I'm doing it. But they need to know the rationale. So you are going to keep that left hip at the net post. And so then you're coiling. And then as you uncoil, so you have to coil properly to uncoil properly. And, you just think of someone serving. I know people can over exaggerate it where they have too much turn. I've worked with so many different tennis teachers. So I think of Vandermeer, working with our students, said, you're over exaggerating the turn. Let me see you just pretend you're not turning at all. And of course, then they still turn, but they don't turn in an exaggerated manner. So I think it's a matter of really coiling from the ground up. And that's where it's not a matter of just your legs going straight up. It's all in the legs. It's all in the kinetic chain. And then, one segment makes the other segment go faster. The interaction of body segments is faster, more powerful than how muscles contract. Go ahead.
No, I love to film. I think Andy put it out itself. I use it a lot, and I film people a lot. I just film like from their shins to their, mid thigh. And when you watch the great servers, their knees kind of roll. I just call it rolling. In other words, they just kind of turn in the way that they coil and uncoil. It's a great way, I think, filming particular body parts of your student to help get the ground reaction force going the right way, I think is more beneficial than serving or filming the whole motion sometimes, or the whole body, because there is a lot of confusion in that. Even on a big screen, when you have one player on there and you're just working one on one with somebody, I like to film that segment in particular and just show what's really going on from the ground to the mid thigh, and see if the body's turning in at all. But you said, something so key is that I always think of Venus Williams versus Serena, and getting the left hip out, and then there's other flaws inside of Venus's serve that Serena didn't have that she was lucky she didn't inherit. But their two serves at the moment of impact were radically different through most of their careers.
Aoife Wilson was on last week with Brendan Moore, two coaches out in Northern Cal. So she went through our tennis tech program. She did an internship with me one summer. Then she was fortunate enough to work with Vic. So there's a tape out there of Vic working with her, and she lifted after the hit. Now we have it on film. She really rebuilt her game, but it's the same principle. The ball doesn't know it's being hit by a ground stroke or a serve. So a lot of times a player will lift, say on a ground stroke, they lift after the hit, so that energy doesn't transfer into the shot. So you got to use film. Going back to Andy Roddick, the players I mentioned, the word snap, their body's going to snap. This segment, snap, 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 is the front leg has to snap straight. That's definitely where you're going to action, reaction, a ground reaction force. Feel your serve coming up through the ground. But it's not a matter of, being explosive like you're jumping. It's uncoiling. So, snap is snapping upward. With Braden used to have the popsicle sticks, big, huge sticks. And, he would have it be set up where for ground strokes or for serves, the front leg has to snap straight. And in biomechanical term, it's not sophisticated at all, but if you're soft kneed, to have all your energy, your right hander, you want to go up and out to the right, lefty's up and out to the left. But if that front knee doesn't snap straight, and it's much easier if you coil properly and you're using your hip as it juts out, it points to the net post to the right. And you just really say you're twisting your upper body over your lower body. But before you even get into that, is that if someone's got a really high tosses too far back, tosses over their head, they have a terrible service motion. They have a hitch. So you have to, it's kind of like, okay, we got to build a house before we buy the furniture. It's amazing with right-handers, again, lefties just the opposite. Film them and their right foot is spinning out to the net post, the opposite net post. That's not good. Now, by the time a player lands, they're going to actually be in a position where they can propel themselves forward. But if you can lock it out where you get the ball right on the strings at the impact point, the feet are lined up to the net post to the right. And from the ground up, we say from the toes to the nose. And that's where you have to be at the hit. But most of the time, what happens is, players will get to the point where they have that upward leg thrust, but when they're hitting the ball, by the time they hit it, they're already going left and going backwards. So, to go big, one thing when Braden used to tell people, don't worry about going in. Just keep your head still, get it way out in front. Keep your head still, stop that left side. And, you find your range. But once someone sneaks a peek, once the head shifts, everything changes. Because once again, the body's the leader. The body's the leader. With, the right hand, we exaggerate it. We tell people to keep the left hand up longer, like like the hands, like the letter X takes place, as we call it, the power X, way at the top of the swing. It doesn't do that. But I remember when Vic first came on the scene and getting arrows, helping him out with the scientific input. And I mean, it's like when someone kicks a soccer ball. For years and years, Jack Dempsey had the record 63 yards, but he had half a foot and he wore a metal shoe and his foot was like a sledgehammer and he kicked straight on. And actually, the part of the world I grew up in, these two guys from Hungary came over, Gogolak 1, Gogolak 2, the two brothers. And they were the first soccer style kickers that kicked it, that, the point after and the field goal in football. And, but, you know, people used to think, well, I'm kicking with my right leg. I just need to lift weights with my right leg. But you need to really be able to snap that front leg. And that's what makes a right leg go like a whip. And it's the same principle. How can someone kick a football? Now they're going for field goals from 60 yards out, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all physics. It's how they use their body, how they use the body off of the ground. But they're coming in and they're stopping that left side, and they're letting the right side act like a whip. Speed turns into spin. They're interchangeable, because if your toss is way out in front and you're really loose and your body stays in the position where the racket can go up, like there's a diagonal ladder going at a 45-degree angle, like you're climbing a ladder. And, if you do that, the freedom is that you can swing really fast. Now, for the safety valve, what players do is they do impart more spin. So we could talk about that. I mean, first serve, second serve. They bring the toss in a little bit to the left. But what's happening more and more is, Medvedev, 6'6", he was struggling against Djokovic one summer. Djokovic was just having a feast with his second serve. So Medvedev just started hitting 2-second serves. And I don't think Medvedev went with a Rod Laver. Rod Laver said,
two first serve.
Yeah, two first serves. I'm sorry. So first serves. So Laver said, I'm not going to differentiate that much between my first serve and my second serve. And if I can't get 1 out of 2, and I don't deserve to win the point. I meet lots of players are sent to me, and someone's talked to them about a kick serve, and they're still in the 12s. And I don't think they need to be. You've got to be pretty strong. You can bring the toss over your head, and you don't want to do that time after time. I'm surprised too that the top servers, they don't take care of their arm like baseball pitchers. You just think automatically that they're going to go through not rehab but prehab. They're going to stretch, and they're going to ice after every time they play. Take care of their arm. But, it's really interesting. The racket helps out. The baseball player is just doing it with their arm only with a 6-ounce baseball. It's not quite 6 ounces, but so the knee rotation to turn into hip rotation, and then shoulder rotation. But most people aren't taught that way. Most people are taught arm action, down together, up together. And, so, and tennis is both a lower body sport and an upper body sport. But, I think it is true that, when we meet people, we have to unteach them. And we have to deal mostly with their upper body, because their arms are flying all over the place. And it's like, no, this serve's not that complicated. They're making it much more difficult. So then if you take care of business from the waist up, that's where, you get kids to kneel on a towel. I mean, that's a great service drill, because then the feet then they're locked in at a 45. Depending on the kid, you choke up on the racket a little bit, but the people in a wheelchair that play at a high level, they're going to get their chair at a 45-degree angle. They're going to toss the ball up, and they're going to take their left hand, and they're going to stop that left wheel, the wheel that's in front, and they're going to keep their chair at a 45-degree angle. So you got to use film, and then it comes down to you're going the wrong way. And just how I said that, you're going the wrong way. So a little bit of emphasis. Like if you're going to tell a kid how they're going to go to the gas station, and they make a left when they're supposed to make a right, they're not going to drive, 25,000 miles around the world. They're going to, through trial and error, they'll eventually find their way. But in everything with serving, it's just like anything with strokes. Start off the right way. When the USTA came out with quick start, I wrote an article that said it's not a quick start, it's the right start. And, it's a lifelong sport. 2 8-year-olds go out and they're passing a basketball back and forth or kicking a soccer ball back and forth. I have great respect for both of those sports, but 2 8-year-olds, it's not going to be so easy for them to rally a ball back and forth. And, okay, the kid's got a Western grip because every ball bounces up high. They got an inefficient grip. So I do think there's been a major emphasis on, the grips. Okay, let's use these transition balls. And it hasn't worked. We're going to use these transition balls so kids have strokes. But one thing
Yeah.
is that there was never really an emphasis on, they're serving palm up. The in all my years teaching tennis, I really enjoyed teaching PE classes. You were part of that. We would teach PE classes every day, and the kids they just had to take the class for the credit. There's no ego, and they just came out and they were just free to learn. There was no hang-ups on who was in their group and who were they going to play next. But yeah, that's where that for me that's all started. Where salute position, twist up, 1, 2, 3. Salute position, twist up, not pizza
Yeah.
position, pull down. And you know, I mean, I've done clinics where, okay, I'm working with 24 kids and we had 24 palm uppers. You can go to a tournament and it's like, mom and dad, if you're listening, you can go to a 12 and under tournament and you go around, you count. I did this recently. I was at a big tournament in Naples and I said to a parent, I said, all right, let's walk around. Let's watch these little kids. And you tell me when someone doesn't have palm up. They're all serving palm up. And it's a crisis, and they don't know. People don't know, and that's where, yeah, I think we talked about Craig Tiley. To put the pressure on him, say, okay, he's the chief guardian of American tennis now. Is I think we need. It's great to go through the schools. It's great to go through the clubs, the associations, but the parent needs to know. They're the one writing the checks. And I mean, I used to do this with my kids. Have them take 2 balls of socks. And they had to pump the balls together, 1, 2, 3, and you have a sock fight. They just throw socks at each other, and it doesn't hurt. And then you can say, okay, well, I don't like the way you're throwing. Now in the game, you got to put the sock on your head. And if they put the sock on their head, you don't want the. It's like Ryan Reedy does a really good job, and I'm going to guess that Ryan Reedy, 2-minute tennis, you should check it out. Under Jim Klein, who was with us for a long time, that he says, knock off the hat, the party hat. So I'm going to guess that he taught a lot of, he's got a great personality that when he was a young coach, and this is all positive. He's an outlier. Listen to him on his
YouTube. Yeah.
2-minute tennis. But you knock the birthday cap off, your racket doesn't get near your birthday cap. You know what you alluded to with that horizontal plane behind you. You're not going to have a large horizontal plane if you're knocking off the birthday cap. So if we tell people, okay, it's like combing your hair. Wait a minute. No, it's the comb the hair action. So when you're doing a progression and you have someone say throwing a ball, put the ball on your head. That's so much better than saying scratch your back and say, now just go around, then, thumb up to thumb down. And then they start getting that feel. They go, wait a minute, but you don't do it from there. Now put it on your shoulder. Now lift it up from your shoulder. Now make the movement. And I mean, it's so important. I mean, for a kid, their level of play is going to be based so much on their serve. So much on their serve. Someone who has a very good serve is this kid, Alex Fuchs. He's had too many problems with injuries. They call him the glass cannon.
Mm-hmm.
Dave Secker told me that name comes from a video game. I thought, I would go, who was so clever to come up with that name, glass cannon? But I remember being with Brian Shelton and Steve Denton, and we're watching him serve. You could just close your eyes and tell by the sound of the ball coming off his racket. That kid had the biggest serve it was the 18 clay courts. Ba-boom. But then, it's so important, like Denton would say about his serve. I remember watching his serve from up above, and it was like, that's unfair. You shouldn't be able to serve that way. Up above where back at the US Open, you could be up really high and watch this one court. I'm not sure exactly. Can't remember what number it was, and he had a chance to beat Vilas. I mean, if he did that, he ended up being 11 in the world. He would have cracked the top 10. But, what he would say about Sampras, I think he's pretty humble in saying is that his serve was equally as good, but Sampras just backed it up with such amazing volleys. Coming in and squaring that racket face out and driving volleys. I mean, yeah, it's just that's something that baffles me as well, is that that's another whole part of the game. But I don't think the serve gets enough emphasis on that's problematic. They're not reaching their max. And I think also the prevention of injury. When a kid tosses that ball over their head and it's accumulative, that over time, it's not going to work out too well for them. All right, Davey, baby, what else you got?
Well, one thing, you feel free to chime in on it however you see it, but I think I probably stole this idea from you, like I have many. For the parents, for the coaches, kids listening, when you're, wanting to play points, trying to put together the sport of tennis and on your journey and still struggling to put together a reliable serve motion, you have two of them. And I told this to a parent the other day, work on the serve you're working on the first serve. And, if you have to compromise a bit and get the second one in the box so you can learn to, form a point and play the sport in the other areas of the game as well. I think that's a good compromise that doesn't have a profound negative effect, really. Because I know my oldest daughter, she was very legalistic and she was the better player than many kids. She actually played when she was up till about 12, 13, but she never could get the concept of the serve down quite well. It was clean, just couldn't get it in and didn't practice it enough. And she would lose match after match because of just double fault, double fault, double fault, double fault. And, I wish I would have told her that because in every other aspect of the game, she was always superior. Groundies were clean and competed quite well. And I'm not talking about kids that have no background in it, but they're working on their serve and they're getting the hang of it. And I was just telling the parent, have them continue to, if they're going to play a practice set, but they don't own the serve yet. They don't have mastery of the control and all of that to keep working on it when they hit their first serve. And then to enjoy a point, if they have to get the second serve in a little bit more of a, unconventional manner just to make sure they get to play the point.
Yeah, I'm going to ask you to say it again. Is it, for me, as well as the listeners, is you to hear the question, okay, this is not really a technical answer, but Nadal, for a long, long time, is that he wanted to stay at a hotel that had a tennis court because he wanted to practice the serve. And, we've heard, the legend says, well, he's a lefty, but he's really a righty. But it's come out that that's not true. He says that's not true. He was always a lefty. But I heard this on TV the other day. I think it was during the French Open. Anyway, I like to be able to tell people where I heard this, who taught this, because you make it a story, then you can really remember it. Beginner is a beginner becomes an expert as long as they don't quit. Yeah. So yes, some people will teach a certain shot better than others. Some people will hit a certain shot better than others. But yeah, I just think really hanging in there. You mentioned Mary Lay. That makes me go back to that. Is if people can get a copy of Tennis 2000, Tennis for the Future, and there's certain sentences, I say every day. I certainly, every day. And, does it really register with people? And, there are people, I mentioned Danny Cooper, Greg Rosetsky said that guy could always serve. Just pick the racket up and he could serve. Some people will certainly, learn one shot much faster than others. I find that a lot of times what people will do is they like to practice what they're good at. So baseliners, what do? They practice ground strokes. And then people who don't have ground strokes, they're going to be very quick to go up to the net. But, do people work on the serve on their own, and working on it at home? And perseverance. Say the smaller players will, they just go back to Rod Laver. I mean, well, Casper Ruud, you mentioned him. What's he 6 feet tall?
Yeah.
You'll hear, well, I think that's one great thing about tennis is that people are saying, well, if you're going to have a great serve in today's game, you know, you've got some giants like, say, Isner, Query, you know, they're on the booth the other day, and then Zverev wins. So you got two, like a guy 6'7", a guy 6'10". They're interviewing a guy who's 6'6". You know, then, you know, what does Joe Public say? And it's like, no, but you're going to have to make up for it. You know, the tall players, they do have, it is advantageous, you know, just the body being a longer lever system, and they can generate not only more speed, but they can just the trajectory, the whole 9 yards with the serve. But with, you know, like, you know, if you have kids say, okay, run around the court, and let's see you just run and shadow swing your serve at the same time. It's kind of like, can you chew gum and walk at the same time? Some kids, it'll come to them right away.
Yeah.
And, you know, and some kids won't. But, you know, it's that beginner who doesn't quit becomes the expert. They just hang in, and it's, they just gonna want the desire to become a tennis player is so great. But coming back to Mary Lay with Braden's book, you know, sentence by sentence, you know, here's a couple, for example. When the racket face is closed, then and only then can you swing inside out. You know, or when the racket face is closed, then and only then you can use gravity and let the racket free fall. If not, you know, you have to recruit muscles. When you change the toss, you have to change the angle of the racket pad. The racket, you know, Braden used to stay away from the word natural, because nobody just naturally picks the racket up and starts to play. But, you know, a great drill is hanging onto the racket just with your thumb and 2 forefingers, and just spin and just swinging the racket that way. You know, parents listening to this, is go out and buy a badminton racket. Just go out and buy a very light racket. You know, get kids to choke up on a racket. You know, years ago when kids were learning to play baseball and the coach said, choke up on your bat, they just choked up on their bat. They didn't give the
Yeah.
coach attitude. That was just the American culture. Hey, choke up on your bat. But, you know, now certainly one thing is that, well, buy a 27-inch racket and you go 26, 25, 24. You know, you walk in and there's a cutout of Roger Federer, and there's a next to him, you know, you need to buy a racket for every age group. And we were developing better players, and you just took an old wooden racket, cut the racket off, and say, "Hey, kid, play with this." I
Mhm.
tell people all the time, you know, hey, your kid's playing with a 25-inch racket. Why don't you get them up to a 26, but just put a rubber band at the bottom? Because, you know, from other sports, you know, the kids that became really good skiers, they weren't the ones that, you know, bought different skis based on their height. They were using hand-me-down skis that were too big, and they figured it out.
Yeah.
But with the serve, grip, swing, body, toss, can you end up on balance? You know, then obviously you don't want. Vandermeer told me this. He goes, Steve, your students are all hitting the ball really well, but you've had them overtrained by hitting on balance. Now their tosses are too far back. Okay, boom, end of story. Take the criticism. All right, and you just tell the story. Hey, I taught this way at one time, and I put too much emphasis on just staying on balance. Still have people do that a little bit in the beginning, but they need to go forward. We haven't really talked about pinpoint and platform. We need to do that before we sign off. But when you serve out to the right-hander, you shouldn't be off balance. But most kids are so off balance because the toss is way over their head, their front foot kicks out, you know, they're jackknifing, they're opening up, they're bending at the waist, and you say, okay, now serve and go to the net. They pick themselves up. But if someone has a really good serve, it's kind of like the rich get richer, you know, and now they're, you know, you put money in the bank, and I guess it doesn't work out like it used to, but you put money in the bank and then the bank pays you. You borrow money, then you got to pay the bank. So if you're doing something well and you're doing it over and over again, you're just building good miling. If kids were to serve and volley some, and I mean, I know it's big from your point of view, the doubles. If kids play
Yeah.
doubles the right way, they're going to have a better serve because they're going to go forward. But from age 8 to age 18, almost every kid who goes on to play college tennis in this country, they've stayed back for 10 years. It's 10 years. And it's like, who's in charge? Who's in charge of developmental tennis? I mean, this is just a crisis. But yeah, anything else, or we go over to Pinpoint platform?
Yeah, Pinpoint platform.
What do you got?
Well, I think that it's important that people understand. I mean, to me, Pinpoint's going to require a little bit more of an athletic nature in a human. The advantages are, the ability to like a baseball pitcher, maybe separate the hips and the shoulders a little bit more. I think that in many players, when they attempt to do it, it actually breaks down the kinetic chain and the body segments. So it's got to, if people do it, I don't think that, I think some people think it's prerequisite to serving well, but history has shown us that there's so many great servers that do the same thing off of a platform. But I think every pinpointer for the most part began as a platform server. And I mean, you think of, Korda made that change from platform to pinpoint. I've watched Monfils go back and forth between pinpoint and platform 100 times in his career, and varying it in so many ways in each of those categories, and even between his first and second, pinpointing on the first, not on the second, and vice versa. So, but I think that, I think people just assume that it has to be a particular way to serve at a high level, and I think that the consumer leans into thinking you have to pinpoint. I don't think they really know that the platform's still such an effective tool, and pinpoint can help people. It can help people get that hip shoulder separation a little bit better, but you better be an athlete, because I feel like it's a very difficult move for somebody that maybe hasn't multi-sported or doesn't have some degree of athletic ability in them. That's my experience with it anyways.
Well, here's a comment, might sound like it's off the wall, but here in the United States, USTA, United States Tennis Association, governing body of tennis, and now you have the ITF, International Tennis Federation. So here's some nonsense. Parents have been told this. If your kid's playing USTA tournaments, well, they could possibly maybe become a college player. If they're playing ITF tournaments, they become a pro player. And that's just nonsense. Is that, one thing is that people are going all over the map to play matches. I mean, I remember practicing with a club player. He wasn't a very good tennis player, but he's a really good baseball player, and he had a really effective lefty serve. I go, I'm gonna play this guy once a week, because you don't get to play that many lefties. But I do think that a lot of people are told, if you want to be a pro, you got to use pinpoint. Just like, you want to be a pro, you got to travel all over the world, play these ITF tournaments. And that's not true. Now, you go with Gonzalez, Sampras, Federer. Oh, you got to be careful. Federer's been retired for a few years. This summer, he's going to be put in the Hall of Fame. So that means he hasn't played in 5 years, right? So I do think that Roger Federer, I think he may be as big as Michael Jordan. Tennis, I should say, kids today, they still know who Michael Jordan is.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that'll be the case. They'll always know who Roger Federer is. But they certainly have don't have any clue about Gonzalez, but, they wouldn't really remember Pete Sampras. That's a shame. I don't think we do a very good job with the history. I know Federer, that's one of the reasons that he says that with Tony Gotzik, they started the labor count. Well, I think a lot of times when people need to make changes in their serve, they should just go back to platform.
Yeah.
Just go back to platform. If you're making some changes, you're changing your toss, you're changing how you turn your upper body, your arms are all over the place, you're spinning out with your front foot, you're collapsing, like I said it all, you're collapsing at the waist. You have no power line. So just go back, clean up your serve. Just go back to basics 101. And then if you're going to pinpoint, you got to make your mind up. You can experiment for a short period of time, try both. But if you're going to pinpoint, I think you're 100% right as far as the athleticism. But when people pinpoint, what they a lot of times do is it throws off their upper body. So they when they bring their foot up, they bring their arm up, and you don't want to have the elbow be coming up when the foot comes up. You want to have that elbow like it's on a post. The elbow only goes up one time. It's very important for people to understand that you're going to turn, and Braden used to call it the chain puller syndrome. Like somebody's riding the bus, and they want the bus driver to stop, so they pull the chain. And watch that very carefully. That again, climbing a ladder, your elbow only goes up one time, and the elbow should be a little bit lower in the shoulder, so that you can be loose. If it's even or above the shoulder, you're going to be tight. But I do think with platform, when you comment on this, is that you can go. Some people go platform, but they go in with the front foot. Some people go platform, and they go in with the back foot. Now, with that, you can just ask a young kid, what looks better? Where you throw a ball, you throw, and then you step. So you throw, then you walk through. Or do you walk through and then throw? And, it's obviously you're going to be releasing so that the step afterwards, the aftermath, you've put yourself in a power line, and it's the foot going forward after the hit. But why don't you comment a little bit on just that front foot for platform, front foot or back foot?
Going into the court first?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, again, I think, I was talking to some kids about this about a month ago. A lot of players don't realize, or people don't realize, you couldn't leave the court on the serve. When you're dealing with, I still serve pretty much where my rear foot, I've gone back and forth on it. I platform at this point in my life. I have for a couple of decades now, but my right foot is the crossover foot into the serve or into the court. And I think it's based a lot on my tactic because I'm trying to get the first ball out of the air. You see so much emphasis on whether it's platform or pinpoint. You see it all over social media where, people are ending up in the scorpion position and then just freezing there. That, they're having kids just stop and just land left foot and freeze. And, it's really not a reality of things don't end up like that. The train keeps moving. But there's so few people looking to capture court. I love Medvedev, who, and this doesn't really tie in, but I mean, you would think he's serving and volleying, even though he has no intent of it because of how far forward he's going into the court. But I think that, Steve, what you said, I think that the Christmas tree is the platform, and when if somebody wants to add that ornament on the pinpoint, but typically they are going up, landing left foot. I don't do that. I come straight through, more like a lot of the players from the history of the game. You just try to capture the court going forward.
The one thing, you want to stay in contact with the ground until the last segment of the kinetic chain. People say, one of Braden's students, Jack Cropple, so the last segment fires out. And with that, yeah, Medvedev, when you toss way out in front, you're going to go in more. I like your scorpion position. You don't just land one foot and freeze. Your momentum will take you forward. So you're going to have really good footwork. So say now your serve's going fast. Now the return's coming back fast. So a lot of times when you get people tossing way out in front, they end up getting caught flat-footed. It's just like when a ball comes to the middle. A lot of times kids, they don't do so well. The ball comes deep down the middle. You're going to take as many adjustment steps for that ball as any ball. With Martina Navratilova, man, she was so good.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been a little bit further over with her grip on the forehand side, but just, a complete player, singles, doubles, so many lost arts from her game, serve and volley, how she could play an underspin backhand approach shot. I say, like, I know Billie Jean King helped Martina in many, many ways, but watching Billie Jean King volley, there's not one girl right now. I don't think there's a guy for that matter. let me correct myself. If you say girl, you say boy. You say guy, you say gal. Say man, you say woman. You say lady, you say gentleman. But they really can volley. It's like, whoa, hit that low, hit that first volley deep. Singles or doubles, make one volley. But Navratilova, how she would bring the heel of her back foot into her instep. So your back knee is actually pointed at a 45 degrees angle to the corner behind you. So to really practice it, and I think one thing about the pinpoint, people, this is wrong. This comes back to the ground reaction force. People think, well, you're pushing off with both legs. Is you're in contact with the ground, and but what does help with the pinpoint is the lower body turning in and keeping that hip to the net post. Because
Mm-hmm.
most people, when they use a pinpoint, they turn their upper body more. But I think in the end, it comes down to commitment. If you want to do it this way, do it this way. But you've got to be committed, and you got to practice over and over and over again. With but again, a lot of players, they need to take time off from competition and rebuild their game. Especially, say for example, this should happen all the time. A kid signs up, they've got a scholarship. They know, okay, I'm going to go here in the fall of 2027. You have a scholarship. They could be the University of, Timbuktu, but they have given you a guaranteed place on the team, scholarship, covering fees, then go to work on your game. I mean, I'd say the same thing about TFO. We won the Orange Bowl. Okay, let's go back to work. Let's go back. You've proven yourself. You're a winner. You're a winner. And then really get connected with, what's the weakest part of my game? What tactical plays can I really play this pattern with? But people definitely need to take a really critical look at the serve and go, the serve that you're using in the 12s, 14s. I mean, your mechanics shouldn't vary that much. Now, granted, like coming back to Mark Dixon when he worked with my son, is that, okay, you can adjust your grip slightly, adjust your toss slightly. But that's just like the really good baseball player has a really good basic mechanics. So now we'll teach you how to make that ball talk. That's where you're okay. Now we're working on, and you get out, your serve is so good. People always have said that, can't say always, they've said it about Federer for a long, long time, that he's such a good, he could serve, he could hit spots.
Mm-hmm.
He could hit spots. I mentioned Raven Klaassen earlier. Thinking about playing against Jack Sock playing doubles. And, he did lose to Jack Sock and Mike Bryan in the Wimbledon final. And on his volley, he's trying to hit spots. Most juniors come in on the volley, you're just trying to pound the ball deep. Well, if someone's got a really extreme Western grip, and you can get, you get past the person hitting so much like Sock, there's so much spin on his return, especially off the forehand side. But, you get in and you make that first volley deep, is that you want to exploit his weakness, and you're going to try to hit a spot when you're hitting your volley to his forehand ground stroke, his second shot. And, again, I'm losing names here. Talked to him on the phone. I don't really know him, but he spent so much time with Dennis Shapovalov, he was at Richmond Hill under Richard Hernandez and his staff. His mother, Tess, worked there for 10 years. But they did so much work at, Veneto, a club near Richmond Hill. But it's at that level, it's where there's a second ball. Where's the ball bounce a second time? Agassi was saying, well, when you play Pete Sampras, he's very dramatic and such a great speaker. It's coming to you north of 130 miles an hour, and it can bounce this way and go, 10 feet, 12 feet in that direction, bounce here and go 12 feet in that direction. So that's where when you become more advanced. But I do think that people, as far as pinpoint, they go to it too soon. I mean, I see kids all the time. I mentioned that on a podcast earlier. I was at this junior tournament not too long ago, a month ago, and some poor kid's hitting against the backboard. and he's got a pinpoint, but he's also got forehand grip. He's got palm up. He's got a high toss, and he's bending at the waist every time. He's hitting ball after ball against the backboard. And, he's got the big shoulder bag and he's at a tournament and the entry fee's too much. And it's like, hey, kid, the light at the end of the tunnel is a train coming at you. That service motion is not going to work. But I do see that all the time. Someone, it's like, well, you've taught this kid pinpoint, but they don't even have a continental grip where we started with. They don't even have the right grip. So I always say this about pinpoint. There's not many advanced techniques. Okay, composite grip on the forehand volley would be an advanced technique instead of like a little kid who started learning off an Eastern and they're just not strong enough to volley with an almost continental grip or the step under on the backhand approach shot. The specialty shots, teaching people to hit off-pace passing shots and topspin lobs. You could say that's all getting away from essential strokes. But Vandermeer did it so well. He said, from basic shots, you teach specialty shots. Emergency shots are a different story. If a kid can hike a football, they're playing a little touch football in their backyard. They play a hike. They can hike a football. They're halfway to learning how to hit a tweener. But people don't realize. People don't realize a tweener is a throwing motion. We're telling kids all the time: buy some foam balls, get a ping pong paddle. Just go out in the garage, toss it, overrun the ball, split step, and this is how you hit a tweener. Then you go to a backboard. And this is how you hit a tweener. You got to hit the ball. And when kids doing that, they're practicing their serve. They're hitting down against the backboard. The ball goes over their head and they go back and the teenage hotshot wants to hit a tweener. But I'm telling all girls, you need to be able to hit a tweener. Why is it just for the boys,
Yeah.
All right, let's wrap this baby up. The serve.
Yeah, I think to sum up a lot of the things you said, we've used this analogy before. You want to make sure you got a good Christmas tree before you put too many ornaments on, and make sure the grip, make sure the swing, make sure the body, get everything lined up, get the Christmas tree right, simplify the toss, and then down the road the ornaments. Learn the different things that we've spoke about tonight, and but it's a process, but it is such a critical shot, and it's a fun shot. I wouldn't know what it's like to get a free point off of it, but someday maybe I will.
Yeah, you can drive off of it, you lob off of it. Kevin Records on one of our podcasts, his high school team, he's got over 100 people on his team. He starts off with he's going to teach the tweener, but serve the serve. We also say this about Braden. Braden's the Christmas tree, and then all these other coaches we talk about are the ornaments, and that's not to belittle them at all. Now, before we came on the air, I was talking to Dave, and he was talking to two college coaches that I know I trained as players, and I told Dave, I said, why don't you do this? Tell them you're going to show up and watch their camp. Is that, I like to give people a knee-jerk reaction. Hey, you're coaching the D1 level. That's great. Really proud of you. We want to come and watch your camp. And I was talking to Chad Burial a couple of days ago. Burial and I, 2 different times, we went to the ITA. It was back when Tiley was a hot commodity. He had recently finished at Illinois. And, he took a team from the bottom, they went to the top, and we had film of Craig, his tennis camp at the University of Illinois. And her theme is that your camp and your team are the same thing. Your camp and your team are the same thing. And that's what needs to happen. Years ago, college tennis players would work their camp. I think it really helped their game to say, okay, we're going to take some time and we're going to teach basics. The highest form of retention for learning is to teach. And I really think that tennis players, they should be able to teach the serve. They should be able to explain the serve. It's like Dave back in the day when we started with tennis teachers. I know you've talked about this, is that you go in a room and you pick one of the 8 strokes. If we had the 2-handed backhand volley, 1-handed backhand volley, you pick out a little piece of paper out of a hat. And, okay, I've got to explain the serve.
Mm-hmm.
And time after time, years ago, this is in the 80s, Well, you go down together, up together, scratch your back. Well, you mentioned earlier, I mentioned it. I would say the sad news is people are pretty much doing the same thing all these years later. Down
Yeah.
together, up together. You can see it. You can guess how someone was taught. Where, and
Yeah.
again, wasn't fair for girls years ago, but you get these boys who would go, they get into tennis and they're already playing Little League Baseball. They could already throw a football and they show up to a tennis instruction that's too much money to begin with. And they're told down together, up together. And I do think bringing other sports, cross training, getting kids, we've got baseball gloves and baseballs and footballs and, teach the athlete first. And, people get into, well, the throw, it's not exactly, and it's true that I guess if you're on the mound and pitching, that's a little bit different than if you're in the outfield. But I mean, is it a throwing motion pretty close to a throwing motion? And
Yeah.
if a kid can brush his teeth, the palm is down. If they comb their hair, the palm is down. And they can learn the difference between palm up and palm down. The problem is when the kid's looking forward at the ball, sensory perception, they don't know what their racket's doing behind them. But you can have two 8-year-olds helping each other out and say, okay, just turn and watch your racket. Just shadow swing one. Look at your racket when you do it. Is the racket, when you like say with your the old baseball trick, you put 3 balls in a sock, and if your palm goes up, all the energy goes down, the ball is hit you in the back. But then people have to realize, okay, Mylan, I'm going to throw rackets. I mean, that's where Richard Williams, he was sly like a fox. He got his daughters throwing rackets, and their second serves were faster than a lot of the men. And so you hear a tip like that and go, I'm going to go to work. And today the problem is the telephone. Kids are just going right to the phone, and you're not practicing before practice and practicing after practice. But
Yeah.
Dave, thanks for all your
Yeah.
time with these podcasts that we're putting out.
Of course.
And I appreciate all the listeners. It's for the betterment of tennis. So 309, another podcast in the book. Appreciate the feedback coming in on having us go back and talk more about basics.
Get
All
out
right.
and practice your serves, everyone.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Dave, listeners.
You
Adios,
bet.
amigos. Good night.
Have a good night. Bye-bye.